My village is located in a rural area that's protected by the government because it's been considered a natural paradise for the last 30 years. This means that exploration is quite difficult nowadays in this area, since it's forbidden to cut trees, which means this forest was huge. I was spending my summer there, and my favorite thing was going hiking, although I never had gone alone in the woods because my grandma had told me that cleaning services had opened and rehabilitated a path that's been covered in bushes and trees for the last 30 years because of a race that was being prepared for runners and stuff. Usually I'd go to the nearest town by the only way I knew, the road. On my way back from seeing friends, there I took the new path that Granny said was fine. The first part of the path was the easiest, just too many obstacles and landslides, but nothing compared to the rest. The second part was a hill full of rocks, and that was the hardest thing to go up. Literally had to climb on 4 legs, like a dog. When I got to the top, I looked around and found some animal bones. I didn't pay too much attention to it since the area is known for its big population of wolves and bears that go out at night. I continued my way faster than before. This part was plain floor, so it was a relief until I got to a dead end. Some huge trees had fallen exactly on a row on the path, and it was impossible to cross them. This seemed really off to me because there were no other fallen trees. The weirdest part, aside from those trees, there was a little barn. Yes, a barn, in the middle of the woods. I thought to myself that it was probably abandoned, so I decided to throw my bag into the little field that belonged to the barn, and then I crossed the fence. I crossed it running without realizing the most bizarre thing. That field had no trees in it. It was clear. No bushes, no big plants, nothing. It really shouldn't be like that if it was abandoned. I started feeling concerned about how the location of the fallen trees was so coincidental. How there casually was a barn beside with a clear field when that path had been closed for 30 years. Just seemed really off. I went on, and luckily I was reaching the last hill my grandmother had described. The one that connected to the village. Suddenly there was a silent moment in the woods, which allowed me to hear some branches cracking behind me. I thought to myself as a bird or something, but when they came closer, they really sounded like footsteps. After trying to convince myself that it was probably an animal, I started walking faster. Guess what? So did the footsteps. I just started running after noticing that, and so did the footsteps again. I was running for my life at this point. Suddenly, I started hearing incredibly loud grunts. Everything was going really fast. Luckily, I got to my village in a minute or so after that. I got into the patio of the first house I found and closed the door. I stayed for 10 minutes until I got my breath back and then came back home. I get chills just from remembering the place, not having signal in the middle of nowhere, and the grunts. It made me think that there was something following me since the barn, and the trees were just a distraction to slow me down. Never went into the woods after that. I've rented the current house I live in for the past 5 years. The house was originally my landlord's grandmother's and was kept in the family. The landlord disclosed to me that the previous tenants had basically turned the house into a trap house before he was able to kick them out and fix it up. My sister's father blessed the entire house as it had a very heavy and uneasy feeling to it. After the blessing, it was far from more welcoming. We moved in and some strange things would happen here and there. We chalked it up to either our cats or roommates, who were also convinced it was something weird. After a couple years and some life changes, I found myself single and living with 2 other roommates. One was never home. I had an old friend contact me out of the blue and said she had something for me, which turned out to be a box of tarot cards. I never used any before, so after cleaning them, I started panicking. Not long after this, I started to find a crystal in my bed, under my fitted sheet, placed on the side of my bed in the middle of my back. I had no crystals at this point, and my roommate was not into anything like that either. I had no explanation other than my roommate messing with me, which was pretty out of character for her. She was just as dumbfounded as I was. A little while later, another gift appeared. A few weeks or so later. This one I have absolutely no clue how it got into the house or where it came from. My roommate had a photo on the ground in our living room, and she didn't recognize anyone in it, so she left it on our coffee table. I had seen it one evening and my blood ran cold. It was a photo booth photo of my ex and I from over 10 years ago, which was taken in a whole other city. I didn't have a single item from back then, as I moved around a lot and had thrown out many sentimental items with my ex to move on. I still can't figure out what this meant. I creeped the X to make sure they didn't pass or anything, and they're alive as well. Since then, nothing happened. It's been very quiet. I have not received anything else. Important to note, all the bedrooms are located upstairs. Last night we set up a blink camera to capture a prank we were going to pull outside my roommate's room. We ended up capturing more than the prank. There were clear orb-looking objects flying around between 3 a.m. to 4 a.m. We were still awake, so I performed a smudging. After this, it settled down, and never went on camera until my roommate woke up at 6 a.m. and used the bathroom. The orb followed them into the bathroom, back to their room, and then it flew around after it left to go downstairs. The house is haunted. I've been gifted things by an entity, and last night captured balls of energy on camera. It was about mid-afternoon when I decided to take an impulsive walk through the foothills of the Appalachian Mountains. The smell of the pine in the air was refreshing as I pushed through a brush and stepped over rocks heading down the trails. The sound of birds singing in the late summer afternoon and the crickets buzzing was a serene, safe feeling for me. It created a type of bubble I got trapped in, daydreaming about who knows what. I was so deep in my thoughts of my mind I didn't realize I had gone off the trail. It was about 30 minutes before I even realized I couldn't feel the soft sand of the riverbank beneath my feet. I didn't remember which direction I came from, so I stood silently for a minute, listening to the birds chirp. I decided to follow the sound of the river, which sounded closer than it actually was. As I was walking, the sun had already begun to set. As I was walking back to the river, this smell began to linger in the air. It was like a thick copper smell, almost electrical. The more as I walked, the stronger the smell got. At this point, it almost smelled like rotting meat, with a side of gasoline. I had to cover my mouth with my shirt at this point because it was so putrid. I decided to ignore the smell and keep walking. After about an hour of walking, I finally was back on the trail. The sun was completely down. Just a tint of orange in the sky was the only light I had to see clearly around me. I was about 5 minutes from the mouth of the trail when I realized the forest around me was silent. The birds had stopped singing their sweet songs. The crickets along with the cicadas had stopped buzzing, which isn't a very normal thing to happen, especially in the evening. The silence was so deafening I couldn't even process my own thoughts. Then the smell came back almost 6 times stronger than it had before. It was so strong this time it actually began to make me retch. All of a sudden, the strongest feeling of dread I had ever had crept up my spine, sending chills all along my body. I stopped to listen, just to maybe see if I could hear anything in the silence. Just as soon as I was about to keep going and ignore everything that had happened, someone or something spoke. Hey you, the thing called out in an almost perfect voice of my own. I couldn't move. All I could do was stand there like a deer in headlights. I spun around to see where the voice came from. I was just about to begin running when I saw it. At the top of the hill, to my left, there was a deer peeking out from behind a large oak tree. The deer caught my gaze, almost like it was intentionally trying to get me to look at it. I stared at the deer, and he began staring right back. Right off the back, I noticed something was extremely off with the deer. At first, I didn't realize, but its head was too dark above the ground to be even remotely normal. The head was almost 8 feet off the ground. The eyes weren't even that of a deer. They were human-like and dark. As far as I could tell, they were black. What happened next will haunt me for the rest of my life. The deer spoke to me, the same voice I had heard only moments ago, and is now coming from the deer. I wanted to throw up right where I stood, only I couldn't move. I was frozen there with my eyes locked with what I thought only minutes ago was a normal deer. All of a sudden, the deer stepped out from behind the tree. The only thing that even looked like a deer was its head. From the neck down, the thing was very pale and lanky. Its skin was wrapped tightly around the slim frame of the creature. I stood there petrified as the beast took a step towards me. It was enough to send me into action. I turned and ran faster than I ever have in my life. I ran even faster when the thing let out the most horrific scream I ever heard and began to pursue me. I ran as fast as my legs could take me until I saw the parking lot of the trail and my car. I got in my car, slamming my keys into the ignition. As my car roared to life, I threw it into drive and sped away from that place, not once looking back. Needless to say, I will never be walking in the woods again.